We are back now with our roundtable. Joining me, former director of both the National Security Administration and the CIA, now a principal of the Chertoff Group, General Michael Hayden, Democratic Congressman from Virginia, Bobby Scott, national security journalist for the New York Times, author of State of War, The Secret History of the CIA and the Bush Administration, James Risen, and back again, David Ignatius of the Washington Post, and our own Andrea Mitchell. Welcome to all of you. General Hayden, you have been in the thick of this debate in your past as one of the nation's top spies. The politics of this are interesting in terms of where the American people are, and we'll put some of the polling on the screen. 56% believe that the secret court ordering the tracking of calls of millions of Americans is something that is acceptable to the American people. Do you think that still holds? Will it hold as more information is known about it?
I actually think as more accurate information is known about it, it will hold and perhaps even expand. Now, there's a natural instinct in the United States, a natural instinct by the way we cover these sorts of things to rush the story to the darkest corner of the room. But I don't think that's where this story belongs. And as Americans learn about the safeguards and the effects, the products of this program, I think they'll become even more comfortable.
So what has been misconstrued from your judgment, having presided over these programs? What is done that people don't really understand is being done?
What was most unfortunate is that both stories, PRISM and the metadata story, came out at the same time. And those stories have been interwoven in a bunch of public discourse about it. The metadata story does touch upon Americans in a massive way with phone records, but not the content. The PRISM story is about foreigners, and it is about content. And those things have become kludged together, much to the harm of the rational national debate.
I'm starting the conversation about the politics of all of this. Congressman, you voted against the Patriot Act back in 2001, and we'll talk more about that. But President Obama, as somebody who has presided over the expansion of these programs, had a much different outlook back in 2007 when he was running against, effectively, President Bush. Here's what he said back in August of 2007.
This administration also puts forward a false choice between the liberties we cherish and the security we provide. I will provide our intelligence and law enforcement agencies with the tools they need to track and take out the terrorists without undermining our Constitution and our freedom.
What has surprised me, and I wonder what you think, is that in light of all of this, he has not come out and said, you know what, I did criticize President Bush over all of those programs, and once I became president, my views changed, because I started to look at the threat assessment, and I was not willing to accept risk beyond a certain level.
Well, I think you complicate the entire discussion by saying it's President Obama's position or Senator McCain's position. If you just look at the issue, I think it's a lot easier to discuss. There are really two questions. One, whether you can collect all this data, and that's an open question. Whether all telephone records are relevant to an ongoing investigation, that's an open question, I think. But even more important is, once you get the data, what can you do with it? And that's, this thing is not limited to terrorism. If it were limited to terrorism, I think the discussion would go away. It's not limited to terrorism. Once the FBI gets the information, then the question is, who can look at it? What can you do with the information? I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can get if you just run through phone calls. I mean, somebody's called an escort service, an AIDS doctor, they bankruptcy attorney. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that would be interesting to know about somebody. We just had a Supreme Court case that said that if you're accused of sexual assault, they can get your DNA. Once they've gotten it and determined it wasn't you, so they have no information on you, they've got the DNA. They can run it through the database just to see if you've committed a crime. Now, they couldn't do that. They couldn't get the DNA from you just to run it through. But once they've got it, they can use it. Now, the FBI has all this data. What can they use it for? Who can look into it? And who gets to see all these reports about the phone calls?
But Jim Risen, has been pointed out, there are a lot of concerns about what the government could do, but there is not actual evidence of abuse of these programs, is there?
Well, there's some limited.
And I should point out, your reporting going back into the last decade was instrumental in revealing a lot of these programs at the very start during the Bush years.
There's some limited evidence of abuse. It's been anecdotal, and there's never been a thorough investigation inside the government of that. one of the problems going back to the Bush administration was all of this was kept so secret, even after we began to report about it, that the inspectors general and the internal investigations were kept secret. So there's never been a full public accounting of the level of abuse, the level of, there's virtually no transparency at all about how much of this really has caught up American citizens. And I think that's really one of the issues here is you've got the creation of a modern surveillance infrastructure with no debate publicly except on an ad hoc basis whenever someone in the press reports about it.
David?
Well, I don't think it's fair to say that there's been no debate. After these programs were conducted without legal authority, essentially warrantless wiretapping under the Bush administration, there was an effort to create this in law. So laws were passed by bipartisan majorities, 2 Congresses under 2 presidents, and we now have these surveillance programs in place. A lot of Congress people say, well, it's confusing, I couldn't bring my staff, I couldn't take notes. Various reasons why they don't know as much as they'd now like to. But the point is that this is now established in law. Parts of these programs are subject to court review by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. Criticisms have been rebuffed. The Supreme Court actually refused to look at a part of this, which is in a sense affirming it. So this is part of our system of laws and legal procedures, and that's what makes me nervous when somebody like Edward Snowden just willy-nilly throws it all up in the air for people to see. You know, we are a nation of laws. This is one of the laws, and you know, it's generally speaking, it's good to follow our legal procedures. That's how we find things out.
One of the issues with Edward Snowden that's really not resolved is how he had access to that court ruling on Verizon, the FISA ruling. He had access to things that were not within his purview. And what he said in his interview with The Guardian is that he could access anyone's emails, including the President of the United States, if he had an email address. And what we're discovering is, going back and looking at his message boards when he had first dropped out of school and was looking around about a career before he got into the Army, before he was hired by the CIA. He had a lot of very provocative, sarcastic, sardonic comments about the Patriot Act. Hard to tell when you're reading message boards, but you could tell that this was a very edgy guy. Brilliant, undeniably. And I'm wondering how he got hired by the CIA, not by the contractor later on, years later, but he first got a top secret clearance as a staff employee
and isn't this
of
an
the
issue?
CIA.
Of course. General, I mean, all these private contractors having access to this classified data?
No, that's not the issue. It's people of this personality type having access to this issue, whether
What about
they're
the clearances
a green
and
badge
the
or a blue
filter
badge,
system?
contractor or government employee. All right, so it's not so much contractors. Contractors don't grant themselves clearances. All right, the government grants government employees and government contractors clearances. So this is a government issue. David, remember I said as people learn about the facts of the case. So let me point out facts. Snowden's wrong. He could not possibly have done the things he claimed he was able to do in terms of tapping communications. James, 5 inspectors general looked at the program I governed, in which you wrote about, and in a public report said there were no abuses. Controversial program, but no abuses.
But General Snowden got into things that you had no idea he was getting
Well, I
into.
understand. But
So how do you know he's wrong?
Well, one more point,
though.
Congressman. It's only terrorism. The only way you can access the metadata is through a terrorist predicate.
Well, and where is that written?
It's in the court order. It's in the broad structure that David suggests.
That's how you get the data. And once the FBI has it, there are practices, and we asked the FBI director whether it's only used for terrorism, and he said yes, only for terrorism. The Attorney General, Gonzalez, said, well, we could use it for criminal investigations.
Well,
you've got the information.
The only reason we've been having these public debates, the only reason these laws have been passed, and that we're now sitting here talking about this, is because of a series of whistleblowers. The government has never wanted any of this reported, never wanted any of it disclosed. If it was up to the government over the last 10 years, the surveillance infrastructure would have grown enormously with no public debate whatsoever. And so every time we talk about how someone is a traitor for disclosing something, we have to remember the only reason we're talking about it is because of him.
And isn't the root of the problem, though, David Ignatius, that Congress, when they debated the Patriot Act after 9/11, Everybody's feeling the rush of fear of 9/11. They can't agree on any endpoint for the Patriot Act. It's reauthorized again in perpetuity. Congress, and Congressman, with respect, I know you voted against the Patriot Act. Congress doesn't seem to have the guts to say, we are going to set a date certain to reassess whether this is a state of security that we want to remain in.
Well, you raise a good point, David. And this state of permanent war, permanent anxiety that followed 9/11 should end, and I think the country wants it to end. I think these programs and the way that Obama has pursued them are an attempt to establish in law a set of rules the country can live with. And although General Hayden would have preferred, obviously, that we not have this debate and that these things remain secret, we're now in a debate that will have the useful consequence of people getting to make sensible decisions about the programs. Do they really add to our security? It looks like the public thinks they do. Yeah, right. Are you willing to give up something to have that security?
Well, respond to Jim, too. I mean, you, as head of the CIA or NSA, you didn't want to have a debate.
No, you give up operational capacity the more these programs are known. And look, I know honest men argue, oh, they knew that, they knew we were doing that all the time, but they don't know the details. And actually, what I fear al-Qaeda learns about this program is not what we're allowed to do, but they learn what we're not allowed to do, and they learn the limits of the program. And David, just one comment. The programs we're talking about here now, PRISM and the metadata program, were established under the court, under President Bush in 2006 and 2008. And although candidate Obama had problems with it, President-elect Obama was briefed on it and embraced them as they existed when he came to office.
General, one of the things that I think has been written about from both the left and the right, Peggy Noonan wrote about it this weekend, is that there is a lack of confidence in the government, which has evolved over a variety of administrations. So when you say, trust me, this data, the metadata are stored, and we're not going to go into it unless there's a court order, unless it's because of a terrorist plot. And then if a judge orders that, it's then turned over to the FBI, and then they can pursue and look at the content. So we've got the numbers, but we're not looking, we're not reading. But people no longer, after Benghazi, after IRS certainly, and after a lot of other things, don't have confidence in their government. And that is leading to a disaffection and a disconnection that going forward is very troubling.
I'm sorry. One of the things that really, I think, concerns people is that you've created something that never existed in American history before, and that is a surveillance state. The infrastructure that, basically using software technology and data mining and eavesdropping, very sophisticated technology to create an infrastructure that a police state would love. And that's what really should concern Americans, is because we haven't had a full national debate about the creation of a massive surveillance state and surveillance infrastructure that, if we had some radical change in our politics, could lead to a police state.
You know, when we talk about the politics of this congressman, look at some of the more well-known leakers or whistleblowers in our more recent history, going back to the Pentagon papers and Daniel Ellsberg and Karen Silkwood, Jeffrey Wigand, the tobacco industry, Bradley Manning, Julian Assange. Who, in effect, as a country, do we like and who don't we like in this capacity?
Well, it's, all leakers are good. And this particular, the law on leaking classified information is murky. Technically, it's not against the law to release classified information if it doesn't do any harm. It is illegal to release information that's sensitive but not even classified if it does do some harm. And so the Justice Department has the burden of proving that Snowden's release caused some harm. I think they ought to be able to do that. And therefore it's illegal. But it's very murky. But one thing, again, there is no separation between getting all this surveillance for fighting terrorism and you get national intelligence, foreign intelligence. Foreign intelligence can have nothing to do with crime, nothing to do with terrorism, nothing to do with any. It could be negotiating a trade deal. You can get a lot of this information, but once you get it, you're going to say the FBI is not going to look into it.
All right, but in this, but Jim, I'm asking the question here about who's celebrated, who's not. I mean, who's a journalist? What's real journalist activity versus what David referenced before, which is, we are a country where we shouldn't be comfortable with the idea of a 29-year-old disaffected contractor who is personally offended by a program, takes it upon himself to leak government secrets and compromise what the government in three branches thinks is important.
And I think one of the reasons that's happened and has repeatedly happened throughout the war on terror is that the system, the internal system for whistleblowing, for the watchdog and oversight system is broken. There is no good way for anyone inside the government to go through the chain of command and report about something like this. They all fear retaliation, they fear prosecution, and so most whistleblowers, really the only way they now have is to go to the press or to go outside like Snowden did. He chose people in the press to go to. He picked and chose who he wanted. But the problem is people inside the system who try to go through the chain of command get retaliated against, punished, and they eventually learn not to do it anymore.
Jim, I think they can go to Congress. They can go to the intelligence committees. They can go to people with
If you're
clearances.
in the intelligence community, if you're a low-ranking person in the intelligence community and you go to the Congress, to the Senate, or the House, you will be going outside the normal
He
bounds.
gave up his career. He gave up his life. So he didn't have to go to China.
Going to Congress would be an unauthorized disclosure.
That's a fixable problem, Jim. I mean,
He's now given the Chinese such a weapon. They are now protesting in Hong Kong, authorized protests, and hacking.
Let me end this part of the discussion on this point, General Hayden, final point, which is, do you have to accept, from your point of view, that, hey, we're just not going to be quite as good at chasing the bad guys, or we have to accept some limits on this for the sake of bringing the American people along?
David, for part of my life, when I was running the NSA program, I thought lawful, effective, and appropriate were enough. By the time I got to CIA, I discovered I had a fourth requirement, and that's politically sustainable. And by the time I got to CIA, I was of the belief that I would probably have to shave points off of operational effectiveness to inform enough people that we had the political sustainability and the comfort of the American population concerning what it was we were doing. So I think it's living in this kind of a democracy. We're going to have to be a little bit less effective in order to be a little bit more transparent to get to do anything to defend the American people.
All right, I want to take just a couple of minutes to switch gears a little bit because it is Father's Day, which is an important day for me to celebrate my dad and celebrate the fact that I have kids and they make me so happy. So we wanted to start an online discussion, which we did this morning on Twitter and Facebook. The idea of, what did your dad teach you? What do you hope your kids learned from you? I tweeted something last night. My dad taught me about dedication and perseverance, and I hope my kids feel encouraged by me and that they learn resilience. It's the kind of thing that I think has really gotten a conversation started, Andrea, as you think about your own beloved dad.
My dad, Sid Mitchell, is going to be 99 next month, and he taught me to keep fighting, to persevere no matter what, to be strong, but the character is the most important thing that counts.
99 is pretty
99.
impressive. And your dad, David, with a huge honor here at 92 years old.
My dad, Paul Ignatius, who was 92, was celebrated this last week at the Pentagon. He's a World War II combat veteran in the Navy, and he served as Navy Secretary under President Johnson. And this week, he brought his family with him to the Pentagon, where a ship was named in his honor. So when I look at my dad, I'm going to think USS Paul Ignatius. So happy Father's Day, Pop.
Yeah, and Jim, it's good to see your boy with you here today.
My oldest son came with me this morning, so he's having a good time watching us.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you think about from your own upbringing?
Well, my father was a railway mail clerk, and back when they still had those kind of things. So I think he always wanted to be a journalist, and wasn't able to do it because of the Depression. So I think he would be happy.
General?
My dad's 93, birthday this week.
Wow.
He taught me about the importance of showing up, being tough, and doing your job. Happy Father's Day, Dad.
Let me just make one comment. If we separate this entire discussion, terrorism and other stuff, I don't think we'd have as complicated a question.
Thank you, sir.
I don't think you have to shave points on fighting terrorism. You do have to shave points if you're using it for criminal investigations. Once you've got the information, going through it for whatever reason, I think you've got a different discussion that's developing this database, and it's sitting there. Don't tell me you're not going to use it for kidnapping or any other thing. Once you start dipping into it, you're dipping into it. My father served on the Newport News School Board. He's the only African American on the school board and served. He was in office when Brown v. Board of Education came down, and being the only African American, most of the votes were for it. Points out they had a subcommittee of the 5-member board. 4 members went to Richmond to discuss the segregation and integration with the governor. You can imagine which one was left out. But being able to maintain decorum and keep fighting, whether you're on the losing edge or not, is something I learned.
The one thing I'm trying to learn as a parent is that even when it doesn't seem like it, your kids really are listening to you. So it's very important that you're trying to say the right thing. We'll take a break here, come back with more in just a moment.